In the last video, we learned about gravity, and what we want to take a look at in this video is friction. So if we jump into our block actor and double-click on that and go down to the physics pull-down, you see that we have this attribute here called friction, which by default is set to 0 for all actors. So if I were to take my ground here, move it up a little bit, and then rotate it, and switch our gravity to 0 in x and 300 in y, so gravity is pointing straight down with a value of 300, we'll get something that looks like this. Our block falls straight down, it hits the ground, and of course it slides across the ground. Now because the default value of friction is set to 0, that means that everything inside GameSalad, all actors, have no friction value. So everything is acting like a piece of ice. So if I were to jump into my block actor here and go down to physics and turn on friction to something like, let's say, 50, what do you think is going to happen? Now, if you've been paying attention over the last couple of videos, you already remember what happened and what I talked about with bounciness. So when I hit preview, try to anticipate what's going to happen now. We get the exact same result as we did before. Which again, I want to reinforce this point. You have to pay attention to every single actor. Just because I added a lot of friction to my block doesn't mean that my ground isn't still a piece of ice. So let's jump into our ground actor. Go down to physics, and for friction, I'm just going to type in a value like 50. And you can see now that we have friction for our block and our ground both at 50. We don't have our block sliding along the surface anymore. So what you're going to want to do is experiment with a few different friction values. So our block is at 50 and our ground is at 50, so you can see our block when it falls essentially gets stuck to the ground. If I wanted to, I could take this ground actor here, hold the Alt key, and click and drag it over to duplicate it. So I'm just going to rename this ground 2. That way I can apply different friction forces to ground and ground 2. So I'm going to go back to ground, and let's just take the friction of ground back down to 0. And then for ground 2, let's take our friction value and set it to something like 50, which it's already set. And then we can start experimenting with different layouts in our scene here. So let's see what happens when we preview this. So no friction on this first ground, and then on this second ground we have a lot of friction, but I of course forgot to put the collide behavior with this. So let's just quickly jump back into our block character, and what we want to do is duplicate this collide behavior. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, click and drag, so we have two collide behaviors here in our block, and we want to switch this from ground to ground 2. So we have sliding, and then all of a sudden we have a lot of friction on this surface. So again, take a moment to apply or to put different actors into your scene and apply different friction values for each one of those actors and see what interesting concepts you can come up with.